Hello, and welcome to another Evolution Simulator video. Just like in previous videos, we have our hexagonal grid, which is populated with hundreds of different colored trees. As you'll recall, the trees are colored according to their three qualities: lifespan, lifesteal, and likelihood of reproduction. This information is also conveyed on the graph on the right, where likelihood of reproduction is on the horizontal axis, and lifesteal is on the vertical axis. I've also increased the resolution of the graph from previous videos. For this simulation, I've coded in two unnatural types of trees, those being the green and blue trees you see in the hexagon. The way I've done this is by giving a fixed buff to the 5% of trees with the highest reproducibility and the 5% of trees with the highest lifespan. You can also see this split through the two small mounds that are formed in the bottom left-hand and bottom right-hand corners of the graph. This behavior is really interesting because of the dual incentives it creates. On the one hand, trees want to become as extreme as possible so they can have the benefits of this buff. But on the other hand, the further away they go from the main group, the less competitive they are. Because nothing interesting was happening in the simulation, I decided to increase the proportion of trees that were getting a buff to 10% for both of them to hopefully lead to more interaction between the two groups. At the start of this new simulation, we see many more green trees forming than the 10% that are getting the benefit. This is most likely because the green trees that are getting the benefit are more likely to reproduce, as well as the fact that the main group of trees hasn't reached its most competitive form yet. However, the proportion of trees that are green quickly declines until it's about 10%. If we skip ahead a bit and look at the graph, what we can see is the first instance of a blob breaking off of the main group. This corresponds to a new brown species of tree in the hexagon that we haven't seen before. The reason this new group of trees is forming is because the green group of trees has become too extreme. Even though the green trees have more stats, they're still losing ground to the main group of purple trees. This is probably because the purple trees are more well-rounded. Because of this, I think that less than 10% of the trees are green, meaning that there's some spare buff that goes to some of the trees in the main group. These main group trees are initially much more well-rounded and so are just more competitive than the green trees because they have the buff as well. But over time they become less and less competitive as they get closer to the green trees and eventually they die off. If we skip forward a bit, we can see the same thing happening to some purple trees that are going towards the blue group. However, after a little while of trying to move towards the blue group, they sort of die off. I think this is because the blue group has managed to replenish its numbers, meaning there's no more buff for the purple group, which kills it off because it's just less competitive than the main group. The other interesting thing that happens at one point during this long simulation is that the green trees just die off, and we see an offshoot of the main group going to replace them with the buff. To me, this indicates that the simulation is, at least the green trees are relatively well balanced, because the pressure on them to behave in an extreme way is sort of countered by the pressures in the environment. I'm now going to skip ahead a little further into the simulation and show you something that really surprised me. Focus on this group of trees that I've circled. At the start, they seem to be going towards the bottom right corner, but then they start going downwards into a place that's sort of in between the two groups of trees that are specialized. If we put in lines to show the areas that could conceivably be receiving the buffs, we see that these trees do actually fall in that area, so that makes it possible that what's happening is the trees are getting both of the specializations. Because of this, I decided to add two lines to the graph to show which trees were getting the buff. Let's look at that model now. If we look at these lines, we can see that they're pushing smaller blobs off of the main group, which confirms our hypothesis. However, after running the simulation for many times, what I've realized is that the green and blue trees don't really encourage that much diversity around them. Therefore, I've decided that in future videos, I'll consider more dynamic ways to encourage the trees to form different species. Thanks for watching. If there's anything in particular you'd like to see me do in future, please comment below.